Well, good morning, everybody, or still good morning. I was in a different time zone yesterday, so if my voice is raspy, it's because my flight and the weather was very, very late. Just a heads up, Ethan here is recording this for the Martinis with Scott channel, and I know you're saying, what is that? So we do pretty much a weekly podcast YouTube show that sometimes is live and sometimes has guests, and it's about entrepreneurs and business owners and management winning at business. So we provide advice, have discussed topics. It's a relatively new concept. I think we did show 25 and 26 last week. So anyways, what we started doing is when I do something like this is it gets up on the, if the promoters are happy enough to do that, it gets up on the channel as well. And you could circulate it internally. You can go watch it again. We're not handing out handouts. You can reference it to other people, whatever you want to do. So heads up on that. I've been asked to talk to you today about cannabis, lending to the cannabis space, what the opportunities are, the good and the bad. Most of my time is going to be focused on the bad, not because there's not good and that there's not opportunities, but because the bad is perhaps less obvious and complicated. And if you haven't had experience in the space, or even if you've had, the space is so vast, so many different things going on, and so quick moving that you really need to have a handle on everything before you start dipping your toes into it. I've been told that you're asking questions throughout, which I'm great with. If you want to just jump in and interrupt me at any time, please go ahead. If you want to save it to the end, just here for you guys, so let me know what you want to do. I made some assumptions. I didn't know your organization. Obviously, I know many of your firms, but I'm going to guess, because it's helpful for the purpose of putting together a presentation, that obviously you're into factoring, but you have other product lines as well. I'm going to guess that a lot of you do some smaller ABL or even larger ABL. Some of you are more entrepreneurial and flexible and would do some term loans or some bridge loans or other opportunistic products. And I'm going to guess that cross-border is of interest to you. So I'm going to talk today about both Canada and the US. And so if some of that's not relevant to you, I apologize, but in a crowd like this, we need to try and capture as much as we can. So the impact, as I said, is my talk today is going to be a little broader than just on the factoring. Here's the case I'm going to try to make to you today. And this can be a conversation. As I said, it's a fast-moving industry. The reason I brought my notes is I'm going to reference a number of press releases. I'm going to reference some stats and some numbers, but also a lot of this is my opinion, just my judgment from the industry. So you can debate me anytime you want. But here's the case I'm going to try and make. I'm going to tell you that cannabis, the industry, particularly in Canada, you'll know this from the papers and from your interest in the space. I'm going to tell you that it's created so much wealth in such a short period of time that it has changed people's lives. It has changed the lives of families. And if you're a lender, that creates an unusual and extraordinary risk that you need to be aware of. I'm going to tell you that cannabis, in Canada in particular, we have a good feeling about it. It's all been legalized, but this is the drug business, and it attracts people that are interested in being in the drug business. And some of that's not good. It presents an unusual and perhaps extraordinary risk for lenders, and you need to amend your KYC and due diligence processes accordingly. I'm going to tell you that it's really hard to collect your loan when it goes bad. And there's all sorts of reasons for that. Obviously, if you have a mortgage on a greenhouse, you can foreclose. That's not going to be an issue. But there are all sorts of complications you may not be aware about, you may not be aware about for secured lenders. And I'm going to tell you that if you can get over those risks, no one has cracked the code on lending to cannabis businesses. I think there's an amazing opportunity for an industry that's growing still rapidly, despite what you read. There's an opportunity to be a branded lender. You could be a lender to the cannabis space because no one is doing that. Everybody's dipping their toes in. They're doing a little mortgage, they're doing a little term loan, they're leasing some processing equipment. But what they're doing is they're trying to get credit committee or their funding sources on side with this unusual thing. They haven't created the product and gone out to market it, in my view. All right. August 2017. Let's take our trip back in time. I was introduced, my firm, Sinclair Range. Olga back here runs the place. She's our vice president and makes all the money on the investment banking side. We're introduced to a private company in southwestern Ontario. They were a licensed producer ultimately, so you could probably research and figure out who they are. Nothing I'm going to tell you is outside of the public available information, but out of respect, they are private companies, so I'm just going to not tell you the names of people or the company. So I was introduced, southwestern Ontario, family-owned tomato operation since the 1960s. The principal that I was dealing with, he might have been second generation, but I'm pretty sure he was third generation farmer, terrific guy, well-educated in whatever they teach you in Guelph, farm sciences, whatever that is there. He was a good grower in the tomato and cucumber space. In 2013, long before I met them in 2017, he started to consider a transition of his greenhouse operations to cannabis. He had has over 600,000 square feet of greenhouse space. I don't know if you've toured greenhouses or know anything about them, but you can kind of not see the end of a 600 to 700,000 square foot greenhouse. It's big. It's really big. So he had, sorry, I'm using this iPad for the first time and I'm making mistakes here. There we go. So 600,000 square feet. So the projection on that is he can make 80,000 kilograms of cannabis a year. You generally get 5 turns on your grow in a greenhouse. That's 80 million grams by my math this morning when I was a little foggy, which is 500 million in projected revenue per annum. Okay, we were projecting in our model that Olga built, we were $6 a gram at the time. All right, so big numbers. As of December 2017, just for some context, remember I met him August 2017, there were 86 companies operating in Canada. Combined capacity was about 100,000 kgs per year, kilograms per year. This guy was projecting 80,000 out of one greenhouse. It's a big greenhouse. And that was, everything combined was not nearly enough to meet the expected demand of 1 million kilograms per year, which, by the way, is nowhere near accurate in retrospect. In preparation for his transition from a tomato operation to a cannabis operation, our principal came up with a couple of really cool ideas that, from an investment banking perspective, made this a neat deal. Number one is he created a where is it here? An 8-stage, there we go, an 8-step approach to eliminate the threat of mold growth. Now, in Canada, you grow in a greenhouse because you get more turns and your outdoor growing is pretty limited in terms of season. But when you grow in a greenhouse, you're going to get mold. And it's really hard for all of the LPs, the licensed producers, to not have mold. And you can't sell product with mold, so what you do is you send it out to be irradiated. And so now you're a cancer patient and you're relying on your CBD and you're relying on your THC, and the very product that you're taking to help you through that has itself been irradiated to deal with mold. I think scientifically there's nothing that says that's a horrible thing, but from a marketing perspective, it's not great, and Health Canada was dead set against it. Well, this fellow came up with this 8-step plan to fix that because he's a good grower and he knows what he's doing. The second thing he did that was pretty interesting is he had the foresight to tie up 32 or over 30 strains of cannabis. So this gets down to genetics, because what plants are you growing? And what every other LP was doing was they were taking genetics from Health Canada, which were not good genetics, and And so you're not getting the good content or the good mix. And at the end of the day, some people will tell you genetics don't matter because when you bring this thing down to an isolate, it just doesn't matter. And others will tell you that the entourage effect, the holistic nature of the plant is really important, and therefore the genetics are really important. So he had these two things, and when you talk to Bay Street about this, when you get to the funds and investment dealers, these were two good pitches that he had on his side. To launch his business plan, he needed $100 million. I went back to Olga's model yesterday, and it was $100 million, which was I forget the split, but there was, it was equity heavy, but there was certainly some term in there that went along with that. And because it's really expensive at a fixed cost operation. So that was all the planning sort of from 2013 through to 2017. But when I met him in 2017, none of that had happened. There were no tomatoes or cucumbers planted. There was no cannabis business plan at all. There was no retrofit being done or construction of the greenhouse to convert it, and the company was insolvent. There was close to $15 million in term to a local credit union in southwestern Ontario. They were fed up. They were hostile. Because they were fed up, the company hired a turnaround advisor that wasn't me, but is a good friend of mine, and ultimately was the guy that brought me in. The company had no management team, had no employees, it had no money to pay its salaries, it had no money to pay its withholdings if it did have salaries. And in addition, there was significant family dysfunction, which caused a lot more stress for our principal. Somewhere in August, September 2017, I think it was right before I met him, I don't recall, but in any event, he had a hearing scheduled in court, and the credit union was putting in a receiver, and they were out of excuses, and they were going to lose the family farm. That was the bottom line. They had a Tuesday hearing. On Sunday, the strategic purchaser they'd been talking to bailed. But for all miracles, on Monday, a specialty lender such as yourselves came in from the West Coast and bought out, I don't know if it was a buyout of the debt or just a financing where the proceeds were used to pay off the debt, but the bottom line is he was saved and the receivership didn't go through. So now you have a new lender with a very high rate, and your principal, of course, at that point thinks that he's been saved, whereas you would all know from your experience that this is just a lifeline. No one can go on and pay these rates forever. You need to use this opportunity and this availability to create your business plan and to make some money so we can pay you back. So we move on to October 2017, insolvent in August. In October, Health Canada grants the license, so now they are a licensed producer. The license was to cultivate. Back then, similar now, you had multiple stages of licensing. One is you could grow. That's called a cultivation license. You could grow it, but you can't sell it. And the idea there is that you prove to Health Canada that you can comply with the rules and the policies and procedures that you set out to get your license to begin with, and then later you get your sales license when you've met that test. So he gets his cultivation license, and between October 7, 2017 and March 2018, he raises equity from the local community, doctors, dentists, lawyers, business people. They raise $15 to $20 million of equity at a $70 million valuation. Okay, a $70 million valuation in October. Insolvent in August, the months before that. So the money creates more problems and stress for our fellow because it brings with it expectations. It brings with it reporting requirements. It brings with it different opinions and points of view. And as a management team, our principal isn't prepared to deal with any of that. He's never experienced this in his life, and he's now thrown himself into a situation that is very uncomfortable, in which he's not performing. To make matters worse, the capital structure that was designed for him, not me, was designed for him, only diluted him. So they didn't do a $20 million raise. They got 200 grand from you, and then they got 300 grand from you, and every time they did that, he got diluted some. And then, so if we went through the math, he figured out at the end of the day, or I helped him figure out, that he only gets about 10%, when he's all done. If he's doing it the same valuations, right? Now, if the 70 million goes up, then that could be different. So more stress. What other stresses did he have? He was out of money always because he got 200 from you, but then 3 weeks went by before he got 300 from you. So, now is he going to make payroll? Is your 300 going to come in? He has those sorts of stresses. He has no managerial support. It's just him and some staff at this point. He has no accounting. He has no business plan or budget. Turns out his 8-point step plan to stop mold was maybe a bit of a black box that he couldn't explain to anybody, which was a problem with the investment bankers. Turns out the genetic issue was great, except he wasn't paying for some of the licenses, so now he was in litigation in Colorado, and he was going to lose. So, that wasn't going well, and there was just general chaos. He's not a manager or a business owner that was prepared for this scale of operation, which is the point of this whole story, by the way. Notwithstanding all the chaos going on inside the business, and at this point, I was brought in to bring order to this situation, which I think we did a decent job at. By February 2018, okay, so August he was insolvent, October he's raising money at 70 million. I had indications, purchase offer indications at $150 million by February, all right? You guys know business owners. You're a multi-generation family-owned business. You were insolvent before. You could have 150 million less, say 20 million in equity that you have for other people, so call it 130 million in your pocket. Do you think he sold? Everybody knows he didn't sell because he's going to be worth $1 billion, right? Next year. That's the way it works. April 2018, our principal drops dead of a massive heart attack. 40 years old, mid-40s, couple of kids. It was a horrible time. That's actually the first time I ever told this story. It was a horrible time for everybody. The stress was too much. And that's what happened. And after that, the company just kind of fizzled. It ended up sort of going slow and selling off to a strategic purchaser. I'm not quite sure for how much. So why am I telling you this terrible story? If you enter this space, cannabis changes lives. The going from nothing to $150 million in your mind and all of the expectations that brings with it is too much. It's too much for many of these management teams. And when you go about, in both countries, in Canada, in the US, when you travel around and you're looking at lending to these companies, the management teams are not as sophisticated as their market caps would indicate. And that's the primary message that I wanted to bring to you with that particular story. So what do you do about it? KYC, 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 know your client. You need to get in, you need to know your client, your due diligence process has to be enhanced, and don't be sucked in by the numbers, because the bottom line is we're all sucked in by the numbers, but the chances are that management is nowhere near as sophisticated as you would expect them to be. If you had met this guy and he was going to be worth $150 million, you'd say, well, that's pretty impressive. Like, you've done a good job, but it's not very impressive, as that story indicates. All right, in my view, we have a perfect storm in cannabis of lending risk. We have incredible overnight wealth, which I've just talked about, and the pressures and greed and bad decision-making that brings. We have public markets. The entire Canadian industry was funded by equity. It wasn't funded by debt, and it was funded by reversing into RTOs, into shells. And with that comes the idea of stock promotion, pump and dumps, short schemes, insider trading. I talked about it being the drug business and the risks and the people that attracts, and unsophisticated management teams and board of directors. To me, that's a perfect storm of lending risk that you need to overcome if you're going to get into this space. So what is that up to? Let's do another example, CanTrust Holdings. Anybody heard of CanTrust Holdings? They were a darling of the Canadian LP space. Give you a quick overview. Founded by pharmacists in 2013, 19th license issued by Health Canada. 450,000 square foot perpetual harvest greenhouse in Niagara, Ontario. Obviously, they're public, which is why I can tell you these things. 50,000 kilograms in capacity in 2019. They were building a bunch more space. We don't need to get into that. They have a manufacturing center of excellence in Vaughan, I'm not even sure what that means, but I think it means a processing facility where they were pumping out some product. They bought 81 acres in BC, and they were waiting for a Health Canada permit to start growing outdoors, which would have been unique in Canada. What else do we have here? Global reach through a series of partnerships and JVs, trading on the TSX, so the Toronto Exchange, as of March 2018. Listed in New York, February 2019. As of May 6, 2019, completed $170 million US dollar raise at $5.50 a share, which put them at about $1 billion market cap. Revenue of over $50 million trailing 12 months. Losses of about $12 million. I don't even know what losses mean in this industry because there's so much mark to market on the plants themselves that it really skews the earnings. But bottom line is they had $12 million in loss, and they had lots of liquidity. So a typical Canadian LP, $1 billion market cap. They've got some greenhouse space, and everybody loves this company. June 2019, things are ticking along really well. This is not that long ago, by the way, June 2019. 72,000 registered patients, medical patients in Canada. Share price at $7, which is still the $1 billion market cap. June 14th, whistleblower and former employee Nick Lalonde emails Health Canada and says that he was instructed to put up a fake wall to obscure unlicensed plants in photos sent to the regulator. Okay? July 3. So now we're going to talk about what happens in July and August 2019 to CanTrust. July 3, they provide an update on the outdoor cultivation in BC, and it says that they're waiting for approvals from Health Canada. Can you imagine why they didn't get their approval? It's crazy that the whistleblower may have put a stop to that. They had issued previous guidance of 75,000 kilograms. Do your math on that, $6 a gram. According to our model, it had changed, but not materially by then. And that if they hadn't planted by August 5th, they weren't going to have any crops this year at all. July 8th, so this is 5 days later, CanTrust issues a statement regarding the Health Canada audit. There were observations by the regulator regarding the growing of cannabis in 5 unlicensed rooms and inaccurate information provided to the regulator by CanTrust employees. The unlicensed room growing took place between October 2018 and March 2019, during which time CanTrust had pending applications. So they made so what you do is you don't get your whole greenhouse license at once. You get it, okay, this part's done. I've got all the security in here, and now I'm licensed here, and now I want to go license that section, right? So they make an application to license that section, but they think to themselves, well, I'd really just like to grow some plants in here and get the revenue anyways, because the market cap of $1 billion needs to be fed. So they put up a fake wall, grow some plants, and send pictures of Health Canada of the greenhouses with the fake wall. Bottom line, that's what they did, okay? I'll spare you the rest of this press release, but it focuses on entirely the wrong things. It focuses on the quality of the plant was good, that we're changing our policies as if a policy, flaw caused them to build a fake wall and grow some illegal pot. And it goes on like that. If you're interested, the Martinis with Scott channel, I did 2 shows on CanTrust in August, not because I want to do research on cannabis companies, but because I'm an expert at turnarounds, is one thing that we do. And CanTrust, I think the title of it was CanTrust shows us what not to do in a crisis. And it's just endless, the things that they do wrong. All right, so that's July 8th. They come out with the press release disclosing to the world at large that they grew illegal cannabis, and they got caught. July 10th, 2 days later, first class action suit out of the U.S., because, of course, they raise money in the U.S., and they're listed on the New York Exchange. July 11th, I want you to picture yourself as a lender to this company, by the way. Tell me how you're feeling so far. July 11th, CanTrust puts on a voluntary hold on all sales of everything. Okay, so they cut their revenue to 0. Why? Because, of course, Health Canada was going to come and shut them down anyways. So they put in a voluntary hold ahead of that. That's July 11th. Next day, July 12th, second class action suit out of the U.S. July 22, 10 days later, they form a special committee. And one of the things, this is not about turnarounds, so I don't want to bore you with this, but it just drives me nuts. So they take a special committee of independent directors, but it's the same people that were there when this grow happened. So, right? And it's one greenhouse. So either you were complicit or you never bothered to drive from Toronto to Niagara to walk through the greenhouse to see the plastic tarp put up with the illegal plants behind it. Anyways, July 24th, third class action suit. July 25th, terminate the CEO and replace him with an interim CEO, who in fact was a director at the time of the illegal grow. Based on the new information uncovered by the investigation, it turns out that the CEO knew about the illegal, he was new to the company, and don't hold me to this, in August, September 2018. He learned about the illegal grow in October, November 2018. And there's an email on file where he says, in effect, cool, carry on. Right? And these people have great CVs. I want to tell you that. Like this guy, this CEO, Olga, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe he was head of compliance at ING, at the bank, or Tangerine, one of those banks. Anyways, like people that as lenders, you would look at their CVs, you just say, yeah, I'm on with this guy, right? $1 billion market caps, lots of options. You need to be aware of this. July 25th, so now we're, same day, get rid of the chairman, Eric Paul. He was the founder of the company. Turns out he also knew about the illegal grow in October, November. And what did he do the very same day that the email was internally circulated notifying key people? He got rid of $1 million of shares on November 16, 2018, the same day, and then sold another $5 million within the next 30 days. And he sold it all at $7 to $9 a share. July 31, class action suit number 3 of the U.S. July 31, the new interim CEO is on Bloomberg for an interview, and I can tell you, as an expert at turnarounds, gave the least persuasive interview from a turnaround professional I've ever seen in my life. I mean, it was just horrible. And one of the things I want to say from this, a quote that I think is relevant to you, is he said, you know, we are a wake-up call for the industry. Okay, so I'm not picking one example by his own admission for you. August 1, the end of July, stock's now $3, market cap 436 million from $1 billion, dropped 65%. Now that's a hell of a 60 days by anybody's standard. But from there it just got worse. The stock declined further. By the way, we started shorting the stock during that period, and we've done quite well, better than factoring rates, I might add. There were 2 more class actions. I'm not sure how that settles out, who wins on that front. The auditor, which I think was KPMG, resigned, rescinded their past audits, of course, because there was a bunch of illegal revenue in it. There's police investigations and securities investigations. Turns out of all of this, the insider trading might be the most serious thing that's going to happen. There was a lender that had a mortgage on the greenhouse. They loaned to a company, CanTrust, that had a bunch of cash. They got paid out in August. Because the company, last I looked, had about $70 million in cash before all of this hit the fan and they stopped reporting. So if you can lend to somebody with a big bucket of cash, great. But apart from that, I think this lender would have been in trouble. All right, so that's the story of CanTrust. And again, why do I tell you? I'm just trying to emphasize this point that the combination of greed and overnight wealth, public markets and massive market caps, being in the drug business, and unsophisticated or even sophisticated management teams who just aren't prepared for this amount of wealth, it causes problems for a lender. You wanted to add something, Olga? No, it was. And why? Why did they choose not to? Greed, right? They're feeding the market cap. Simple as that.
Yeah, that's the interesting part. I mean, what is that tipping point that makes them make those decisions that they throw everything out the window? Why understand that, but, you know, it seems such a waste.
It does seem such a waste. But as a lender, what are you going to do about it? Right?
Is that illegal, bro, being sold in the black market?
No. It was sold through all the retail distributions. It was sold overseas. So they did a recall from Ontario, recalls from Alberta, recalls from Denmark, I think it was. Right? Imagine the cost of all that and the litigations coming out of that. Right? So I know that you guys secure yourself by factoring and you secure yourself on the term side with whatever, and so you hope you're isolated from this stuff. But there's always enterprise risk, right? There's always a hope that a floating charge is covering something. And in this case, I think it would have been a disaster. Okay. Well, this is an interesting point. So I've spoken to a bunch of counsel about this. I'm not a lawyer, and we did a seminar at Gallings with Gallings. Sinclair arranged my firm, Gallings and HMB, did a seminar for a lot of the special loans groups in town and accountants. There was no other lawyers because it was sponsored by law firms, but we talked about exactly that point. There is an argument that this goes on, and that Health Canada has not been overly aggressive about it, and so, or perhaps even complicit. I don't believe that that's true, but there's an argument on the street that that's what's happening, and so there's an argument that maybe CanTrust thought they were okay. Maybe they were pushing it a little bit, but it wasn't as drastic as made out to be. I would counter that by saying, when the chairman found out, he sold a bunch of his stock. Right? I mean, I think that's pretty good evidence that he thought he was doing something wrong in my books. Let's do one more of these. I don't want to beat up on the industry, but I think there's just different angles all the time you need to be aware of. Afria Inc. Afria is a Leamington-based public company. Leamington, of course, being southwestern Ontario. They were an LP, an early LP. Pharmaceutical grade medical cannabis, a bunch of brands like Soleil, Rift, Good Supply, Broken Coast brands. Picked up their trailing 12 months this morning. Revenue $254 million, EBITDA minus 22, $15 on the high, 52-week high for their stock, and a $4 low. Market cap this morning was about $1.6 billion. Good sized company. The market cap before was $2.2 billion. December 2018. I'm just going to try and do this one quickly. There is a short report that comes out of the U.S. Now, for those that don't know what a short report is this is the opposite of a pump and dump. So the fund shorts the stock, 2 months ahead of time or whatever the time frame is, and then they issue an analyst report which says all of the bad things about the company to try to drive the stock down, right? And then so it's called a short report. And just because I use air quotes doesn't mean that the allegations aren't true, right? But you need to take it with a grain of salt. So, December 2018, we are of the strong opinion that Afria is part of a scheme orchestrated by a network of insiders to divert funds away from shareholders into their own pockets. In general, the scheme is explained as follows. They say Afria insider Andy DiFrancesco. Andy is a Toronto stock promoter guy who moved to the U.S. He's a speculator, he's a hard worker, he's a hustler, he's a decent guy. I don't really dispute what they're alleging against him in here, but that's some local flavor for you when they bring Andy into this thing. Sets up and acquires, he sets up and acquires an international company with a token justification. So he goes to, say, Jamaica or to Argentina, and he finds like a little retail store that maybe they sell some cannabis through, and he buys it for very little, okay? He then sells that foreign company to a Canadian shell company owned by Andy DiFrancesco, according to these allegations. The shell company then sells it to a company called Scythian, I don't know if I have the pronunciation on that right, which is a sister company, also publicly traded, sister company to Afria. Scythian, Vic Neufeld, is an insider on that, and Vic Neufeld is also the chairman and CEO of Afria. Okay, Scythian then sells it to Afria at a big markup. So you've got it laundered through a couple of different shell companies, and you've got Vic as chairman and CEO of Afria being front and center in part of this scheme. Now, you talk about KYC. Vic is a well-respected pharmaceutical executive, and before that, I believe he was an E&Y partner. So again, you're looking at people's CVs, and you think, well, this is going to be fine. But here we go. So let's give an example. So actually, let me give a summary on this. So basically, Andy buys something worthless, runs it through two shells, sells it to Afria shareholders, and the insider claim is that the effect has been massive. We estimate that at least 50% of Afria's $1.46 billion in net assets have been diverted to investments that are at best grossly inflated. Okay? So they give an example. Jamaica, March 2018, Scythian signs a letter of intent with a Jamaican company, Marigold Acquisitions, with a BC company, Marigold Acquisitions. Marigold Acquisitions, in turn, had bought 49% of a Marigold projects in Jamaica. So you got a Jamaican company sold 49% to a BC company, which had a letter of intent to sell to Scythian. 4 months later, Scythian flips that LOI, so they didn't even close on it. They flip it to Afria, and they make so they paid an estimated $145 million, and they made a $127 million gain when they sold it to Afria shareholders. It says Andy and his other insiders made $18 million personally on that. And then here we go. On the ground in Jamaica, this is what this Marigold project really is. It's a company registered in a building that when one of these guys went to check out the building was abandoned. They claimed to lease Unit 51, and there was no Unit 51. One of the company's founding directors has claimed, denied ever being a director. There was a scientist associated with the project that no one could find. Turns out the plot of land, the raw land that was going to be used for growing, wasn't licensed to grow cannabis. There was a whole bunch of conditional license all waiting for approval. And it turns out that that Andy DiFrancesco, according to these guys, and his partners had bought Marigold projects in Jamaica for $118 US, not millions, $118, and sold it for $145 million a few months later in 2018. Okay, this is the industry that has gone on in Canada. The U.S. is the same, lesser numbers, but it's exactly the same. Okay, and you know what the public markets did with Afria over that? Nothing. They had a little blip, but Afria is going strong today. They had a good earnings report shortly after this. And I did a Martinis with Scott show on Afria as well. And I said, Afria shows us how to handle a crisis because they made changes immediately. They put in controls. They made a bunch of promises. I don't follow the company. I don't know whether they follow through on it or not, but they handled the crisis really well and just carried on without blinking on this thing. So their primary defense was audit, fairness opinions, and legal review in all jurisdictions. That was their primary defense.
So it ticked all the boxes.
Yep. Yeah. All right. Those are some examples. I'm just trying to make sure you have this idea that there's a lot of lending risk in this space, and I'm not sure what you would do as a lender to deal with that, but I think you need to change your due diligence processes. I think you need to know KYC, and I think you have to have somebody who can understand how to run that business if all goes wrong. Unless you're just dealing with one asset, and no matter what happens, you can grab your assets and be fine. Let's talk about restructuring and lender remedies and the problems with that. So we're shifting gears a bit here. There are substantial legal obstacles in both Canada and the U.S. to restructurings and for secured lenders. So in Canada, the primary issue is, there's been no insolvencies of LPs in Canada, really for two reasons. One is there was no debt at the beginning, right? It was all equity, so no one's acting on their debt. But more importantly, more importantly, all of the value, as I proved in the first example, where they went from insolvent to $150 million, the value is in the license. Well, all market participants in Canada need a license, and the license is granted from Health Canada and is specific to a person doing an activity in a location. Okay? There's no provisions for transferring that license to a different location. There's no provisions for putting in a new person, like a receiver, to take over that activity. There's no mechanisms for a transfer within the Act, as I just said. You need a security-cleared person in charge at all times, which obviously your accounting firms that you're going to bring in to act as on the insolvency side, on the receiver side, they don't have that person. And to make matters worse, when you go to Health Canada to try to preserve the value, I'm just going to urge you to think about the value of a licensed LP, like the first example I gave you, $150 million, versus the value of that greenhouse without that. I mean, in that particular example, there'd have been about $149 million swing in security value. They go to Health Canada, they're trying to have a creative discussion, and the experience in the industry is that they're just not getting a response at all. It's not like, no, we won't work for you. It's they're not work with you. They're just not responding. An example of that is Ascent Industries. So this is a company that had its, a Canadian public company that had its license revoked, suspended, and then revoked by Health Canada, following which its revenue came to nothing, and they filed CCAA, and E&Y is the monitor. So I'm just going to try and cut this one short a little bit. But the bottom line is in the monitor's report, you can find that the monitor understands that Ascent provided additional materials to Health Canada on or about February 20, 2019. Ascent is still waiting a further response from Health Canada. A July 9 report by Ascent's court by E&Y said the firm hired a consultant. So they went and hired a consultant to engage Health Canada in a sale or transfer of the licenses, but received no response from the regulator at all. Okay, and I'm running a little over, so I'm going to cut this short. The primary message I wanted to give you out of this, out of being a Canadian lender and taking security, is that the value is in the license, and you can't take security over the license, and you can't transfer it. So what are you going to do about that? I think the answer is, you need to think about this as if you were lending to a regulated industry such as health or financial services, right? You can't just put a receiver into a doctor's office or what have you to run it. So it's a similar thing. I think CROs are the answer. Fair disclosure, I'm a CRO. That's a large part of what our firm does, or at least half of what our firm does. But I think, you need to be looking for creative, going concern solutions to these problems. And you need to think about that up front. Okay, let's move to the U.S. So that's the primary issue in Canada. In the U.S., we have a different issue. The different issue in the U.S. is that cannabis is federally illegal. It is 3 states, this is about 2-month-old information, 3 states where cannabis is completely legal, 11 where it's completely illegal, 11 where it is completely legal, and 36 where it's legal for medicinal but not for recreation, so in part. And of course, just to continue on with where we are legally in the U.S., the Farm Bill passed about a year ago now, something like that. And what it did was it removed hemp-derived CBD from the Controlled Substances Act. So it made hemp legal. And so as Canadians, we sit around and we say, well, hemp's legal. Cannabis is not, but hemp is legal. And I'll come to that in a minute. So because it is federally illegal, cannabis companies in the U.S. are prohibited from filing bankruptcy using the United States Bankruptcy Code because it's a federal code. They can't seek protection from their creditors, and lenders can't use U.S. Bankruptcy Code, federal code, to enforce their rights and do whatever else lenders do. The bankruptcy trustee cannot administer assets without violating federal law. That's one cause for this. Or in Chapter 11 and Chapter 13, the bankruptcy plan cannot comply with the good faith requirements of Section 1129 if you're keeping track of your sections. Bottom line is cannabis cases are thrown out of bankruptcy court all the time in the U.S. So what does that leave you with as a lender? And the answer is state remedies if you're operating in a legal state, and if you're operating in one state. If If you're operating in more than one state, now you've got more serious issues. State remedies include UCC remedies, your Uniform Commercial Code, which would be foreclosures, ABC transactions, state receiverships, which are not awesome, and of course, mortgage holders have their state remedies as well. So that's what you're left with. It's not a standard federal bankruptcy. Again, CROs are a great option in the U.S. for that reason. Going concern solutions. There is a creative use of Chapter 15s, which is beyond the scope of what I'll get into today. Chapter 15 is cross-border Canada-U.S. filings. And so what U.S. companies are talking about doing, I don't think it's been done yet, is actually incorporating a Canadian company, filing here, and then using Chapter 15 to affect that filing in the U.S. because that technically doesn't create a state and gets around this issue. So that's fair enough, right? We all understand that if you're directly in the cannabis business, it's federally illegal, you can't use the federal law. That makes sense. Now it gets more complicated and a little bit weird. Indirect business. If there's enough of a cannabis taint to it, the courts are going to dismiss the case as well. It's universally accepted that if you're a direct participant, you can't use the bankruptcy courts. And direct participant means growers, manufacturers, distributors, and anything along those lines. But it also means the U.S. trustee has taken the position that those leasing commercial space to a legalized marijuana business is generally precluded from accessing bankruptcy courts. The Controlled Substances Act makes no distinction between a grower and a landlord. Okay, so if you're a Canadian lender to a commercial real estate company with a portfolio of assets, one of which might be a marijuana company, you're also precluded from using federal bankruptcy courts. There's an example of that. And again, I'm running short on time, so I'm going to skip some of the details. You can look up Arm Ventures in Florida, but it's as simple as I said. Religiously, they're throwing out any real estate restructurings that involve a rental income from cannabis companies. Here's one, Garden Supplies in Way to Grow Inc., which I believe was out of Michigan. So this was a hydroponics gardening supply company that had no cannabis clients. But in their filing of their plan, they contemplated going into the cannabis business. It was thrown out because the plan was derived from cannabis, okay? And I think when I say it was thrown out, I think they were told to go back and do a plan that didn't have cannabis in it, which was a materially different plan. All right, so as a lender, it's not just cannabis. It's not just marijuana in the U.S. You need to be aware of everything you're doing in the U.S. and what sort of marijuana taint it may have. Hemp. I talk about hemp a lot for two reasons. One is hemp is the new LP. Like the gold rush is going to U.S. hemp. Everybody's excited about it. And two is because I've talked to several of your peers. I don't think any of them are here, but I've talked to several of your peers, and they've told me straight up, no, we don't do cannabis deals. We'll do all the hemp we can find, though. All right? So let's talk about hemp. As a rule of thumb, we all think that hemp is legal. So what does that mean? Well, they removed hemp-derived CBD from the Controlled Substances Act, which doesn't mean it's a free-for-all. It means that the regulator moved from the DEA, which is a criminal thing, to the FDA. And what has the FDA done? Nothing. All right? So that causes all sorts of problems. Hemp is used in CBD, but cannabis is also used. Marijuana is also used in CBD. And so the question becomes, can you confuse the two, right? And the most obvious issue when you're thinking about that is very few people can look at a hemp plant and a marijuana plant and tell the difference. I mean, they're the same species, right? They have different chemical makeup inside, but it's basically the same plant. So you have that problem. But here's interesting. So I'm a director of a hemp processing company in Colorado, and we've bought a large grow of hemp in California. And one of the things that I found interesting is that thanks to the miracle of reproduction, a hemp crop can start off making only CBD, and through pollination can actually turn into a THC plant, into marijuana. It's called going hot in the industry, all right? So your legal deal can turn into an illegal deal, and for many reasons. One is pollinations, as I've said. Another is studies have found that if two certifiable hemp plants hook up, most of their offspring will be able to make THC. Okay. In fact, some of these seedlings only make THC. The wild card's pollination I talked about outside of a greenhouse, and nobody grows hemp in a greenhouse, or very few people. You can't control that. You also get the introduction of THC in the extraction process itself, because this is more or less the same equipment, and people are doing both plants, and so you can get that contamination. There are companies or individuals that go around the U.S. Because there is no real regulation or controls of this, and they pick up CBD oil out of the gas station shelf, and they do testing on it, and none of it is what they say it is, or very little of it. All right, so the regulatory side just isn't there, and you don't know if you're lending to a legal deal or an illegal deal. That would be my submission to you. I'm going to skip a bunch of other issues with hemp, but one of them that I'll skip in more detail, but I'll just give you a brief summary, is that it's the reverse of marijuana. It's legal federally, but in many states, it's illegal. Okay? And when you say it's legal federally, the FDA has said that you can't put it in food products, you can't put it in any health product, and you can't make any health claims about it. So all of these products they're making with CBD are not in compliance with FDA regulations. Now, the FDA is doing nothing about it, and who knows where that's going to shake out. But bottom line, this is just not as legal as us Canadians say that it is. So in summary, both countries, I think as a lender, you have risk, and you have problems acting on your debt, in my view. And again, to me, this comes back to amending your due diligence process, understanding the risks, and right from the time of underwriting, right from the time you issue your term sheet, you need to find a way to deal with this and how you're going to exit your loan. All right, what's going on in the industry right now? I'll just give you a few points so we have an idea. And if you're reading the press or seeing what's going on, it just seems to be chaotic. Like things are going great over here, and the industry's changing over here. Most licensed producers in Canada have been pursuing aggressive expansion plans, and if you add it all up, by 2021, the industry in Canada is going to reach over 2 million tons or 4 million kilograms of product, which is more than double the current expected demand. So you have a glut of product coming in. This whole build it and they will come, that's not happening anymore. That doesn't include the black market supply, which is still going strong. And one of the reasons that we have such a bottleneck is that there's only, I think we did this, Olga, 2 months ago, but there's 290 retail locations in Canada. So that was a few months ago. Let's assume it's more. By comparison, Colorado alone has 100,000 retail locations. So the distribution is controlled by the provinces, not by the feds. Okay, so every single major Canadian LP, with the exception of Afria, have abandoned their guidance for the analysts, and it's all because of this bottleneck in distribution. All right, and because of the bottleneck, and because the funds have been pulling out and the stock has really become a retail stock, the equity is not there. The access to debt is tight. But you're not seeing very many large equity deals. Actually, I have some stats on that for you here. Just bear with me. In October 2019, there were 33 transactions in North America, including 17 private placements, 4 public offerings, 8 M&A deals, 4 shelf registrations, $619 million CAD was the deal volume, which was a 57% decrease over October 2018, and transaction value decreased by 77% year over year. And debt deals aren't getting done either. I mean, there's some getting done. You look at Aurora Cannabis announced their BMO facility a couple of months ago. But when you look at Aurora Cannabis, they're hardly a cannabis company anymore. They've got, somewhere I have the notes on this, but they have 10s or 30 different subs and different areas and different geographies and different businesses that may be loosely related, but you can create a term and you can create a revolver and really isolate yourself from some of the risks when you get to a company that size. You guys aren't going to be able to do that because you're lending to more pure plays, in a sense, because of the dollar size of what you're doing. Access to debt is tight. Cannabis grower Green Thumb issued a $105 million bond in May 2019, and with a 12% coupon in the public markets. And since then, the rates have gone up a couple more points. Deals are starting to fall apart. In October, just last month, MedMen pulled its plans for the purchase of PharmCann, which would have been the largest deals in the cannabis sector, and they just couldn't get money at the price that they wanted. You're seeing a growth in cannabis real estate investment trusts because they're selling their real estate and doing sale leasebacks. Right? That's a sure sign that they're not getting evidence, they're not getting the money. So that's what's going on in the industry. So let's, as a last point here, as I get to the end of my hour, let's talk about this being an industry in transition and the lending opportunities that do exist.
As far as I know, the things have changed. Bank of Aviva was the only bank where you could actually physically go and open an account for cannabis related. You go to TD, they won't even take your money. Is that still the case?
I don't know.
That's the last only Aviva was
I'm not going to say publicly here where we have accounts because they're not BMO, and nobody asked. So, but you might be right. And I will tell you that we're getting bank accounts for this company, this processing company in Denver that I'm, as a launch, and we've spent about $1.5 million so far, somewhere in that range, creating this process. And all we're doing is processing hemp. And Olga has called how many banks?
15. And all of them are said, like, I don't grow, it's just pure hemp, isolate processing, better legal.
It's a real problem. It's a real problem.
Or at least they can't openly advertise that they will take an account.
Well, there's one, if you talk to the lawyers there was really one credit union that serviced everybody in Colorado. And when we reached out to them, they said, we're full. We can't. I don't even know what that means in a banking institution. We're not going to take your money. All right, an industry in transition. When I first started in this industry a couple of years ago, I used to go down, wander up and down Bay Street and hang out at Katana and Bymark and those sorts of places and go to the pitches. And everybody was talking about valuation based on funded capacity. And okay, well, what does that mean? So it means you have a greenhouse of X number of square feet, say 600,000 square feet. So that exists, right? I'm not growing any plants. I haven't done a retrofit, but I do have access to a 600,000 square foot greenhouse. And the funded capacity part means I also have plans to build another 400,000 square feet, and you're going to give me the money for that, so it's funded. And so now I have 1 million. That's my square foot. And that's my capacity. And valuations were tied to your funded capacity. They weren't tied to your projections. They weren't tied to anything normal. I used to say, to me, that's like valuing Heineken on how many acres of grain it has growing. It just makes no sense. And the industry is clearly going to transition as it matures. And that's what is going on. The days of the Canadian LP are dead. Like, the big guys have won. There's going to be shakeout. There's going to be consolidation. But that's not the play anymore. I mean, Canopy announced the other day that their cost per gram was $6. Now, I think there were some unusual charges in there, but it was $6. You can grow in Colombia for 50 cents, maybe less, maybe 10 cents. Like, in a global industry, are we going to be growing in greenhouses in Leamington? That's not the way this is going to go down. But it's evolving. So we've gone to hemp in the U.S. You've got the commodity. Now we're moving into processing, right? This is the manufacturing. You take the what's harvested and you turn it into an oil. And then you've got the product brands people. So they're taking the oil and they're turning it into a topical cream or into an edible or into whatever they're making. And you have the distribution, being the stores or the online platforms. Okay, what I'm urging you to think about is that's what's happening in this industry, is that transition. And the capital markets are struggling to keep up. But this business is no more magical than anything else that you deal with. At the end of the day, you've got a farmer, a commodity grower, You got a manufacturing plant, you got people that make and sell products and brands, and you have distribution. And you can lend to every one of those, right? So your grower, well, there's no receivables for the most part because they're selling forward contracts like every other farmer, right? So you don't have a receivable on that. You probably can't lend on the inventory, one, because you can't go take the inventory, and two, because it's a plant, right? So you've got mortgages on the greenhouse space and term on the equipment. That's your opportunity with them. Okay, and there's always little exceptions, but for the most part, that's what you'll see. Manufacturing side, it's a manufacturing business. You've got real estate, you've got equipment, you've got inventory, and you've got receivables. And you can do all of that subject to mitigating the risks that we talked about here today. The product branding side, same thing. I think you might find that in that space, you're going to have some consumer receivables that you can't go against, but you do have some receivables, you have inventory, and whatever your platform is, it might be a lease. I don't know what it would be. Probably some cash flow lending there, opportunities there as well. And the same with distribution. I don't need to walk you through that. What I want to encourage you to think about is don't get hung up in the magic of this, and all the speculation in this industry. At the end of the day, it's just a business. There's a commodity, it's manufactured, it's turned into a brand, and it's distributed. And you know how to lend to every one of those things. You just need to be aware of the greed and the sophistication of the management teams. And so what you're seeing is, what I see all over North America is smaller lenders doing all of that in one-offs, right? So the BD fellow finds a deal, and he says, "Oh, that's really cool. I'd like to do that $2 million, lease or term loan or whatever." And he brings it back to credit, and he spends the next 3 weeks trying to sell ownership and credit and their funding source in turn on the idea of doing this, weird cannabis industry stuff. And maybe they get it done, or a lot of the time they don't get it done. If you could turn that around, I think, if you could turn that around and create that product now and for every one of those spaces and brand yourself, I think you get everybody. Like there's lots of people looking at it, but no one's cracked the code, as I said at the beginning. Wrap it up, conclusions. There's ample need for capital in this industry, including debt. Equity markets are soft, and Olga may have more experience than me, but I think the way Bay Street works, that's going to last for a year or two before things turn around. You agree? Yeah, right, at least. Growth is not over. The growth is over for Canadian LPs because they're huge and they've already won. But the industry is just changing. It's morphing into the next part, which is the manufacturing and the branding. Letting the small businesses so far, the small to medium size so far has been focused on convertible equity plays, mortgages, equipment, leasing. We already discussed a bunch of that. If you have flexibility, I would do bridge loans all day long. I would do high yield bridge loans with equity kickers and combine that with someone who could step in and run this business if need be. I like that product a lot in this space. We talked about branding yourself as a CBD lender. I don't know if I'd go full on marijuana, but I would go CBD. Creating different products for the types of businesses we already discussed. I would create an advisory board or credit committee to advise on that space up front. It changes every day, and you need to know what you're getting into. If I've enforced nothing else today, it's complicated. Hopefully you've got that. I would, for this space in particular, I'd revisit my underwriting and due diligence processes and the professionals that you're using on that because it's not standard. I would change my expectations on exits. I would, think about CROs. We've done bridge loans to the space, and we've written right into the term sheet and to the loan documents and to the GSA. We've written in provisions to appoint a CRO immediately, upfront. And you get legal advice in the jurisdiction as to how to go about that. It changes, but you need to, if you don't do it up front, it's harder to do, obviously. You already know that. And get a CRO on speed dial. Questions? I'm Scott Sinclair. Sinclair Range is the company, and Olga Jelani in the back there is our vice president who runs the whole place. And what else can I tell you? Martinis with Scott is a YouTube show that we do and a podcast. We put out content. It's free. You can subscribe. And this show will be on there. Ethan, what do you think? About a week? We're done. Thank you.